Before you listen to this story, please turn off the lights in your room or make them very dim. Put your phone down, get comfortable, and let your body relax. Take a slow, deep breath, then gently let it go. You do not need to think about your day anymore. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. Just listen calmly and let my voice guide you. This story is not meant to excite your mind, but to help it slow down. Allow your thoughts to fade, your breathing to become steady, and your body to feel heavy and safe. As the story begins, you can simply rest and slowly drift toward peaceful sleep. In a quiet valley far from the busy roads, where knights in shining armor ride and merchants hurry with heavy carts full of goods, where the thick forest stands close like an ancient guardian watching over everything, and the fields spread out in uneven patches of brown earth and green crops, tended endlessly by hands, rough from years of labor. There lies a small village without a name on any map, made up of simple huts built from mud, carefully mixed with straw and animal dung for strength. Walls woven with thin, flexible branches called wattle that bend gently in the wind, but hold firm through storm after storm. Roofs covered in thick layers of golden thatch, when newly laid but growing dark and heavy with moss, and damp when the rains come season after season, leaking slowly in the same familiar places where wooden buckets or old pots are placed underneath each winter, without anyone needing to be told. Doors hung crooked on leather hinges and closed with simple wooden latches. Windows, nothing more than small openings with wooden shutters that never quite shut out the cold completely. The air inside always carrying the comforting smell of wood smoke drifting lazily up through the central hole in the roof, mixed with the earthy scent of packed dirt floors, scattered with dry rushes or straw that crunch softly under bare feet in the morning and grow musty by evening. The low warmth of animals sharing the single room at night, the cow tied in one corner with her slow breathing, chickens nesting quietly under the bench, perhaps a goat or pig. If the family is fortunate, sounds of gentle shifting and occasional soft snorts blending with the crackle of embers in the stone-lined hearth that sits in the middle of everything. The heart of the home where all life happens, cooking, eating, mending clothes, telling stories, praying, birthing babies, nursing the sick, and finally laying out the dead before burial. Here in this hidden place, far from castles and kings and the great events written in history books, ordinary peasants have lived and endured for generations, facing the hardest challenges the world can throw at them, sudden deadly plagues that sweep through like invisible poison, long, slow famines that empty bellies and weaken bodies over months and years, and the constant, steady pressure of distant lords who own the land and demand a large share of every harvest, and many days of unpaid labor with nothing but their quiet strength. Careful knowledge passed quietly from parent to child and neighbor to neighbor. Simple faith in God and the saints, and an unbreakable trust in the slow turning of the seasons that somehow, year after year, brings spring again, with its promise of green growth after even the harshest winter. You wake each dawn as the very first pale gray light begins to creep through the gaps in the shutters. The air inside the hut still cool and thick, with last night's smoke that hangs in layers near the rafters, where bundles of dried herbs and onions and garlic dangle from the beams. The straw-filled pallet beneath you, damp in places from the night's chill. Rough wool blankets, heavy on your chest, and smelling strongly of sheep and smoke and sweat. Your body already aching from yesterday's long hours in the fields, bent double weeding or swinging the heavy scythe through thick rye. Joints stiff from sleeping on the hard earth floor. But you rise anyway without complaint, because the day waits for no one. The ox must be fed and watered before the sun climbs high. The fire must be coaxed back to life with the few precious dry twigs saved carefully from yesterday's gathering. The children must be stirred gently from their sleep in the corner so they can help with chores before the Lord's steward calls for labor later in the week. And the narrow strips of your own family land must be tended early while the morning air is still cool and the soil soft from overnight dew. The hut is small and crowded. One large room for most families, though some have added a tiny lean-to for storage, or an upper loft reached by a rickety ladder where older children sleep. But everything happens together. The grandmother dozing by the hearth with her spinning wheel close at hand, the father sharpening tools with slow, careful strokes of the whetstone, the mother already stirring the eternal pot of pottage that hangs on its iron hook over the low flames, adding a handful of barley or dried peas saved from last year, and whatever fresh greens she gathered yesterday along the hedge leeks, or wild garlic or tender nettle tops picked with thick cloth to avoid the sting children running in, and out with buckets of water from the well, or armfuls of firewood collected from the edges of the Lord's forest where fallen branches are allowed, if you are quick and quiet. Animals moving about underfoot, adding their own warmth and smells and occasional mess that someone will sweep out later with a bundle of twigs. Voices low and familiar, calling to one another with simple instructions or gentle teasing or quiet prayers as the day begins its steady rhythm. Outside, the village stirs slowly, smoke rising thin and straight from each roof hole in the still morning air. The distant lowing of cattle, the sharp crow of a rooster, the soft thud of an axe splitting wood, women greeting each other at the well with buckets balanced on hips, men already walking toward the fields with tools over shoulders, children chasing each other between the huts or helping drive the geese toward the common pasture. Everyone, knowing everyone else's business without needing to ask. Small arguments from yesterday, forgotten in the face of today's shared work. Help offered without words. When someone's ox is lame or a child is crying with hunger. The elder, usually just the oldest man or woman, whose hut still stands strong and whose memory reaches furthest back, sitting on a bench outside, carving a new handle for a broken hoe, or simply watching the sky to judge the weather. Offering quiet advice when asked about planting times or which herb eases a stubborn cough. Life here is bound tightly to the land, and the weather, and the slow cycle of seasons that dictate everything spring with its frantic plowing and sowing, when the frozen ground finally softens and every able hand is needed to turn the plowing and tie-play. Heavy soil with ox-drawn plows shared between families. Summer with endless weeding and watching for drought or flood. Autumn with the urgent harvest, when long days stretch from dawn to dusk, cutting grain with sickles and binding sheaves to dry before rain can ruin them. Winter with its cold, pinching hunger, when work turns inward to mending tools and clothes and roofs. Gathering what firewood is permitted. Telling stories by the dim light of tallow candles made from saved animal fat. Praying longer at the simple wooden cross by the path for protection through the dark months. And always, through every season, the greatest threats hang over the village, like unseen clouds, ready to break plague that can arrive suddenly and take many lives in weeks. Famine that can stretch over years and weaken everyone until even the strong fall ill. And the lords whose demands never pause no matter how bad the harvest or how deep the snow. When the first whispers of plague reach the village, perhaps carried by a peddler who passed through coughing heavily, or by a family fleeing a stricken town, farther down the river, fear spreads quickly but quietly. Faces growing serious. Voice dropping lower. Decisions made together in hushed gatherings outside the huts after dark. Strangers are turned away firmly at the edge of the fields, even if they beg for shelter, because one sick outsider can doom everyone. Doors and shutters are closed earlier each evening. Families stay inside more than usual, burning strong-smelling bundles of dried herbs on the fire. Rosemary and sage and juniper gathered in summer and saved carefully in the rafters to thicken the smoky air and drive away what people believe are poisonous vapors that carry the sickness. Hands washed often in cold water mixed with precious vinegar, if any remains from last year's weak wine. Clothes boiled in big pots outdoors when possible, even though the rough wool shrinks and wears thinner. Anyone showing the first signs a sudden fever. Swollen lumps. Dark marks on skin, isolated gently but quickly, in a small, rough shelter, built hastily far from the huts. Food and water, left on a flat stone nearby. Cared for from a distance by masked relatives who leave offerings and pray loudly enough for their voices to carry comfort. Graves dug deep and away from the well when death comes, as it too often does despite every precaution, marked only with a simple wooden cross and a few stones piled carefully. The name spoken softly in prayers forever after. Yet because the village is small and far from crowded towns, where the plague burns hottest, because fresh wind moves freely over the open valley, carrying away bad air, because families act quickly and together without panic. Many survive, emerging pale and thin, when the danger finally passes with the changing wind, grateful beyond words for every ordinary morning that returns, for the taste of plain bread and thin stew that feels like feast after fear, for the sound of children laughing again, and animals lowing peacefully, for the quiet joy of simply breathing without pain. And though some hearths are left colder with empty places that ache for years, the village binds tighter in shared memory, helping the bereaved with extra labor in their fields, or quiet gifts of seed or tools, carrying the lesson forward that caution and care and prayer together can hold back even the worst sickness the world sends. Famine comes more slowly and cruelly than plague, building over seasons of bad weather, endless rain that rots seed in the ground before it sprouts, long dry spells that turn young crops brown and brittle, sudden hail that flattens whole fields in minutes, swarms of insects that appear like dark clouds and strip every leaf overnight, early frosts that blacken beans and peas still green on the vine, and when harvest time arrives, the sheaves are few and light. The grain, sparse and small, the storage chests filling only halfway, no matter how carefully, every ear is gathered and threshed. Yet even in such years the Lord's steward arrives as always on his sturdy horse, followed by men with empty sacks, his ledger book open and his voice sharp as he demands the fixed share of grain and peas and wool that is owed, no matter how little remains. Weighing each measure carefully, while villagers stand silent with heads bowed and hearts heavy, knowing that protest brings only harsher punishment or soldiers sent to take more, watching helplessly as the best of what little they have is loaded onto carts and carried away down the muddy track toward the distant manor house, leaving families with barely enough to seed next spring and nothing extra for the long winter ahead. Then begins the slow struggle to stretch what remains pottage cooked thinner each week with more water and fewer barley grains, flavored only with wild herbs or salt if any is left. Bread baked from whatever flour can be ground, including acorns, laboriously gathered and soaked for days in the stream to leach out bitterness, or ground dried peas, or even inner bark, from certain trees stripped carefully in narrow bands so the tree survives another year. Children sent out daily to glean every overlooked stalk or fallen nut after the Lord's men have taken their share, walking the stubble fields for hours with sharp eyes and bent backs, women searching hedges and woods for anything edible, rose hips, berries, mushrooms, known to be safe from years of careful learning, nettles, dandelion leaves, sorrel old stories, retold of worse famines, survived long ago by eating things no one speaks of now. In better times, fires kept small and low to save precious wood, huts growing colder as snow falls and wind finds every crack, bodies huddling closer under every scrap of blanket or old cloak, sleep coming uneasy with hunger's sharp edge. Yet still the work continues, because giving up means death surer than any plague tools mended by dim firelight. Clothes patched with smaller and smaller scraps. Roofs watched carefully for new leaks. Animals tended with extra care, because their milk or eggs or future meat may mean survival. neighbors sharing quietly, whatever small surplus one family might have, a hidden handful of dried apples, a small sack of beans, discovered buried deeper in the chest, a Lent goat to provide milk for a sick child without announcement or expectation of quick return, kindness stored in memory to be repaid when fortune turns again. And through the darkest months, prayers grow longer and more fervent, said together, at the wayside, cross or alone by each hearth, asking for mercy and strength and the simple gift of rain or sun at the right time. Old songs sung softly to keep spirits from breaking completely. Children taught early to recognize every useful plant and to waste nothing. Elders reminding everyone of past famines endured and passed, until at last spring returns with its miracle of tender green shoots pushing bravely through cold soil, with warmer air carrying blossom scent, with stored seeds sprouting despite all doubt. And slowly, bellies fill again with fresh milk and young greens, and the first thin new pottage that tastes of hope itself. Gratitude felt so deeply, it needs no words. Only quiet tears wiped away quickly before children see. The lords who own every acre and every life upon it are known only as distant figures, perhaps glimpsed once in a lifetime riding through with armed men and bright banners, understood mainly through the steward who appears regularly to collect rents and labor, his face stern and his quill never stopping as he records obligations in his thick book, demanding days of work on the Lord's own wide fields, or repairing roads and bridges that serve the manor more than the village, taking eggs and chickens and honey and wool as additional payment when grain runs short, watching closely for any sign of hidden surplus, punishing severely those caught holding back even a little. Yet peasants learn quiet ways to lighten the endless burden, sowing a small secret patch in the woods where grain might grow unnoticed, hiding the best portion of harvest under straw in the roof, or buried carefully in sealed pots before the steward arrives, working slowly when his eyes are on them, but swiftly when alone, sharing labor obligations. So many hands make one family's duty lighter, answering questions with careful words that reveal nothing extra, repairing tools themselves in long evenings to avoid the blacksmith's fees paid in scarce produce, teaching children early to bow respectfully, yet keep their own counsel. And though anger burns low in every heart at the unfairness of laboring so hard, only to give away so much, open rebellion is never truly considered, because memory holds clear tales of villages burned to the ground and families hanged from trees for defiance, while careful endurance allows life to continue season after season. Strangely, balance exists even in hardship. The Lord, needing strong workers to keep his own wealth growing, sometimes sends a cart of grain or salt in years of greatest need, or allows extra gathering of fallen wood when hearths grow desperately cold. Small, reluctant mercies accepted without thanks, spoken aloud because pride survives even on empty stomachs. Reminders that the heavy chain binds both high and low in its own harsh way. Daily illness and injury come in many smaller forms between great plagues, fevers from chilled, damp, coughs that linger through wet winters, cuts that fester from sharp tools or thorns, aching backs and joints, worn by endless bending and lifting, childbirth, dangers that take mothers or babies, too often fought with careful knowledge, handed down through generations of women mostly. Willow bark stripped fresh and boiled into bitter tea that cools fever and eases pain. Honey, carefully saved from wild hives, mixed warm with strong onion or garlic for deep chest coughs. Poultices of soft, moldy bread, or boiled cabbage leaves pressed hot against swollen wounds. Yarrow leaves chewed and applied to stop bleeding. Chamomile flowers dried and steeped for troubled stomachs. Elderberry juice for winter colds. Every hut keeping small bundles of herbs hanging from rafters, smelling sharp and full of promise. Old women respected deeply as healers whose memories hold. Which plant grows where and works best for what ache. Children taught young to recognize safe leaves and roots during walks in the woods. Prayers said faithfully, each morning and night, for protection and healing. Rest taken only when fever burns too high because fields and animals wait for no one. Yet neighbors always appearing quietly when someone falls too ill to rise, bringing weak herbal tea or thin soup, milking the cow, watching children, sitting vigil through long nights, so no family faces sickness entirely alone in their smoky hut, through every trial plague. Famine. Lord's demands. Daily hurts. The true strength of the village lies in the quiet web of community that holds everyone together like hidden roots beneath the soil. When heavy snow collapses a thatched roof, every able hand turns out at dawn with fresh straw and ladders to raise it again before night cold kills. When fire accidentally claims a hut, neighbors open their own crowded doors without question until a new one can be built. When death takes a worker in his prime, others share the plowing of his strips until his sons grow tall enough. When seed runs dangerously low after failed harvest, the elder quietly walks from door to door, collecting a handful here and there to make sure everyone has enough to plant. Debts of help recorded only in hearts and repaid gladly when the wheel turns. Small daily kindnesses passing unnoticed. A lent tool returned, sharpened better than before. A shared loaf when baking day yields extra. A watchful eye kept on grazing animals, so none stray gossip and argument set aside quickly, because tomorrow may bring need, requiring the same circle of hands and voices. Holy days bring rare but precious moments of shared joy, however simple Advent and Christmas with weak ale, brewed from precious barley and perhaps a small piece of salted pork shared among many. Easter with painted eggs, if hens lay well, and new green herbs in the pottage. Harvest home when the last sheaf is carried in with quiet songs, even after poor yield. Saints' days marked with small gatherings outside the largest hut, sharing whatever can be spared. Weddings celebrated with everyone bringing a little food, so the young couple eats full at least once before returning to daily hunger. Births welcomed with proud smiles and gifts of eggs, or soft wool for swaddling. Deaths mourned together, with neighbors digging the grave deep and sitting long into the night, telling gentle stories of the one gone. These moments weaving people tighter than any Lord's law or church decree could ever manage. Children grow strong, learning by doing how to guide the plow ox with gentle voice and stick, how to swing the sickle in steady rhythm without wasting grain, how to patch thatch so water runs off properly, how to recognize rain clouds early and bring animals in, how to speak politely to the steward while giving away nothing important, how to pray with true heart yet keep hands busy, how to find small joys in ordinary things, like the first warm sun after winter, or a perfect ripe berry found hidden under leaves. And elders pass on not tales of battles or riches, but stories of survival. Of the great hunger, many grandfathers ago, when even the strong grew weak, but shared what little remained. Of the black sickness that took half the village, yet taught the rest to burn herbs and wash hands. Of lords kinder or crueler in times past, and how careful ways kept people alive through both, as years pass slowly like water wearing stone smooth. Hair grays and backs bend lower. Hands grow more twisted from endless work. Eyes dim, yet still sharp, for spotting useful weeds or approaching rain. But the rhythm holds steady rising with light. Laboring until dark, eating what land and careful hands provide, sharing without counting, praying for mercy and strength, finding deep peace, not in grand dreams, but in simple continuation, in seeing children grow tall enough to lift the plow, in watching spring return faithfully after every cruel winter, in lying down each night, bone-weary, yet alive, surrounded by familiar breathing and soft animal sounds and the faint glow of embers, the roof holding one more year. Tomorrow bringing much the same, yet carrying the quiet gift of another day to tend and endure and keep life going in this small hidden valley where history passes unnoticed, but ordinary courage burns steady as any hearth fire, waiting patiently for the next generation to take up the same ancient tools with the same unspoken faith that somehow, together, against plague and famine and lords, life goes on under the wide, patient sky, as the years roll gently onward like the slow turning of an old watermill that has ground grain for more lifetimes than anyone can count. The village remains much the same, tucked safely in its quiet valley, where the forest edges never retreat, and the fields keep their familiar shapes marked by ancient hedges and half-forgotten stones that once served as boundaries long before any living soul was born. The huts, still leaning a little, as if tired from holding back wind and rain for centuries. Roofs patched again and again with fresh straw each spring, until the thatch becomes a layered history of good years, and bad. Walls cracked in the same places where new daub is slapped on every summer by hands that know exactly how much straw and dung to mix for strength. The central hearth in each home, still the glowing heart of everything, sending its smoke up through the roof hole in lazy curls that drift over the village like a soft gray blanket on cold mornings, carrying the smells of burning oak and apple wood gathered carefully from fallen branches, rings of pottage simmering endlessly with whatever the season offers, of wet wool drying near the flames, of animals breathing warm and steady in their corner, all blending into that familiar scent that means home more than any grand stone hall ever could. Children who once ran barefoot between the huts chasing chickens or playing simple games with sticks and stones now walk taller, shoulders broadening from early work, learning the weight of the plow handle or the swing of the sickle with the same patient guidance their parents received, while the elders who once gave that guidance now sit longer on benches outside their doors, eyes dimmer, but minds sharp with memory, whittling new tool handles or mending nets for catching eels in the stream, telling the same stories over and over about the great frost that killed the fruit trees when they were young, or the summer so dry the well nearly failed, or the time the Lord's steward was kinder than usual and left an extra sack of salt behind. Stories told, not for excitement, but for teaching how to read the sky for coming rain, how to store grain safe from rats, how to speak carefully when questioned by men on horseback, how to share without seeming to have extra, how to pray with true heart when all else fails. Daily life flows in its steady, unchanging rhythm, waking with the first bird call or the pale light creeping over the hills, stirring the fire to life with bellows made from old leather, fetching water from the well where women gather to talk quietly about births and illnesses and whose goat wandered too far again, milking the cow whose warm milk steams in the wooden bucket and provides the only fresh richness most days will see, feeding hens and pigs and the precious ox that pulls the shared plow, eating a small breakfast of leftover pottage, warmed quickly, or bread saved from baking day, dipped in weak ale, if any remains. Then out to the fields where the Lord's wide domain must be worked first on appointed days, plowing deep furrows in spring, weeding endless rows in summer heat that makes backs ache and shirts cling with sweat, harvesting with sharp sickles in autumn until arms tremble and fingers blister. Every task watched sometimes by the steward's cold eye, but done thoroughly because the Lord's grain feeds his household and pays his taxes and keeps soldiers away, and only after those obligations come, your own narrow strips scattered among the common fields, smaller patches tended with extra care, because they mean the difference between thin survival and actual hunger, planted with rye and barley and oats and peas and beans in careful rotation, learned from generations of watching what the soil likes best, guarded against birds and rabbits and deer, with children stationed as scarecrows or simple fences of woven branches, harvested with the same quiet urgency, because every grain counts when winter looms long and dark ahead. Meals remain simple and repeated, the eternal pot hanging over the hearth, never truly empty or truly full. Started fresh when possible after baking day, but usually just added to day after day with water and whatever can be spared, coarse barley or dried peas as the base. Flavored with leeks or onions, grown in tiny garden patches behind the huts. Cabbage heads tough but filling. Wild herbs gathered on the way home from fields. Sometimes a scrap of salted pork saved from the pig slaughtered at Martinmas if the family was fortunate. More often just the bone boiled again and again until it gives nothing more. Bread baked in the communal oven built of stone at the village edge, on appointed days when each household brings its dough shaped into heavy rye, loaves dark and dense, with whatever flour could be ground, including saved acorns or peas in hard times. Loaves marked with the family sign scratched on top, so they come home to the right hearth. Eaten fresh and warm on baking day, with a little butter churned from precious cream if the cow is giving well. Then saved carefully, wrapped in cloth for the days following, until the last piece grows hard and must be soaked in pottage to soften. Ale brewed weak from barley, in wooden barrels for safety, because water alone can bring belly cramps. Drunk by all ages, because it sustains as much as it quenches. Small joys found in rare treats like wild strawberries discovered in the woods, or honey carefully harvested from a found hive, or apples from the few old trees that still bear despite frost and age. Shared immediately among children with sticky smiles that light the whole hut brighter than any candle. Evenings bring everyone back inside as light fades and shadows lengthen across the fields. Animals driven home to the safety of the hut or small byre if one has been built. Doors latched against wolves or wandering foxes, though real danger is rare. Fire banked high for warmth and cooking, and light. The single room filling with quiet talk and small tasks, mending clothes with bone needle and homemade thread, sharpening tools on the whetstone with rhythmic scrapes, spinning wool on the drop spindle while telling children stories of saints or talking animals or times long past. Singing old songs soft and low about love or harvest or journeys never taken. Praying together, kneeling on the packed earth before the small wooden cross hung on the wall or the simple statue of the Virgin carved by someone's grandfather. Prayers, long and heartfelt, asking protection for the coming night, and strength for tomorrow, and forgiveness for small sins, and thanks for whatever mercy allowed another day to pass with food enough and family safe. Then finally settling onto straw pallets, with wool blankets pulled high, bodies weary, but minds slowing gently, listening to the wind whispering in the thatch overhead, the soft breathing of loved ones all around, the occasional shift of the cow or bleat of a goat, the dying crackle of embers, glowing faint red in the dark, thoughts drifting over the day's small events, a new calf born strong, rain finally falling soft and steady on thirsty crops, A neighbor's kind word or lent tool, a child's laugh ringing clear or worries pushed gently aside until morning. Sleep coming deep and dreamless, because exhaustion makes the best pillow and safety, lies in numbers crowded close. Through all the seasons, community remains the hidden strength that carries everyone forward. No one survives alone in such a hard world. And help flows quietly like an underground stream, always there when needed. When illness strikes a family too hard, others bring herbal teas and sit long hours tending the fire. When death comes, neighbors dig the grave deep in the small churchyard beyond the fields and carry the body wrapped in the best cloth available. Sitting vigil through the night, sharing quiet memories and weak ale. When a young couple marries, everyone contributes something small to the simple feast, so they begin life together with full bellies and bright hopes. When harvest yields better than expected, small gifts of grain or eggs pass hand to hand, without announcement to those who suffered loss. When tools break or animals sicken, advice and aid appear immediately because tomorrow the need may be reversed. Gossip and small quarrels forgotten quickly in the face of real hardship. Laughter returning faster because joy shared multiplies, while sorrow shared divides and becomes bearable. Holy days punctuate the year with precious light. However, meager the offerings, Advent waiting with quiet hope. Christmas celebrated with the best the village can manage, perhaps a little extra ale and a shared goose if one family was fortunate in raising. Candles made from saved fat flickering, longer than usual. Children wide-eyed at simple tales retold. Easter, bringing painted eggs and new green herbs in pottage, symbolizing rebirth after winter's grip. Saints' days marked with small gatherings and shared bread. Harvest home, when the last sheaf is brought in with gentle songs and thanks, even after poor yield, because some grain grew at all. Midsummer Eve, with a small fire on the hill, and quiet dancing in circles under starlight. All these moments binding people closer than blood, in many cases, reminding everyone that life holds more than endless labor, that shared faith and shared song and shared simple food create something stronger than stone walls or iron chains. And when great trials return, as they always do, another whisper of plague carried on the wind, another failed harvest, bringing hunger's slow shadow, another steward demanding more than seems possible, the village meets them the same way it always has, with caution learned from past pain, with careful sharing that stretches little into enough, with quiet ways to ease the Lord's burden without inviting his wrath, with herbs and prayers and watchful care for the sick, with stories told to keep courage alive, with hands extended across fences without needing to be asked, with faith that spring will return and green life push through again, with the deep unspoken knowledge that endurance itself is victory when the world offers little else. Generations come and go, faces changing slowly as children become parents and parents become elders and elders finally laid to rest under simple mounds, marked with stones, carved with nothing but a cross, and perhaps initials scratched deep. Yet the village endures in its hidden valley. Life flowing steady and small but unbreakable. Ordinary people facing extraordinary hardship with nothing but patience and community and hope, handed down like the most precious heirloom. Rising each dawn to tend the same fields and mend the same roofs and share the same thin stew. Finding in that very repetition a kind of peace deeper than any castle dweller ever knows. Lying down each night, weary but alive, under the same wide sky that has watched over them all since the beginning. Carrying forward the quiet miracle of survival against plague and famine and lords, not through glory or rebellion, but through the simple, stubborn strength of continuing together, day after day, season after season, heartbeat after heartbeat, until the last gentle breath fades into the smoke rising softly from the hearth, and the next small hand reaches for the hoe at dawn, ready to begin again in the same patient, endless circle that keeps life turning gently in this forgotten corner of the world, long after grander tales have turned to dust.